Joining us now, Paul Milde. Paul is a Republican candidate for House of Delegates. That's the Fredericksburg area. And Paul Milde defeating incumbent Republican Bob Thomas in a primary. The Speaker of the House, Kirk Cox, and most of the establishment had backed Thomas, including us. Milde, the winner there. And now he's in a dogfight to hold that seat. Paul, great to have you with us, man.
Good morning, John. Thank you for having me.
Okay, number one, how do you navigate through the fact that most of the establishment Republicans in the state, including the Speaker, backed your opponent in the primary, Bob Thomas? You narrowly defeated him, big upset. How are you navigating your way through all that with a month out?
Well, they're pragmatic. I started getting the phone calls that night saying, "Look, we backed our guy. He was our guy, but now you're our guy." So the leadership didn't take long at all to start to pay attention to me and learn a little bit about me, and then they have no problem supporting me, and they do. The extension of that, of course, on the ground here is that when you have a brutal primary, and that ours got particularly negative. We're still trying to make sure we bring back the Republicans who were vested in and supported Bob, and we think we'll do that. My opponent is as far left on every issue as you can get, and so that helps. Not too many people who consider themselves conservative, even moderately conservative, look at my opponent and think that that's someone they want representing them in the House of Delegates.
So you feel like Republicans are coming home. Paul, tell us about your fundraising. You put a lot of your own money in the primary. You haven't gotten any money right now from the Speaker's office or from other Republicans. How are you doing financially, and are you going to continue to self-finance in the final month?
Good question. So we don't want to telegraph too much what we do, but if you would notice, and you may have noticed in my primary, we kept low balances on hand, and when we needed money, I just transferred it from my personal savings or money to the campaign account. We have not had to do that in the general election. We have been doing really well. I'd say raising money. We have had 2 out of our 3 events have been very successful, and the caucus is definitely giving us money in the form of in-kind mail, which has been flooding your mailboxes in this district. So they are helping us, and you'll see a lot more in a few days. And then when the next campaign finance report comes out, we don't have the kind of money the Democrats have, as you probably have spoken about. I would guess they're tripling up on average. I'd say they're raising 3 times as much money as the Republicans in the races that really matter in the Senate and in the House of Delegates. But we have, at least in my district, it's a slightly, and I mean very slightly, Republican district, we think. And I'm a better known candidate with I believe a better message. Having served 12 years on the Board of Supervisors here, I'm not an unknown quantity.
So let me ask you something, Paul. What do you think about the Democrats and your opponent, one of them, getting all this dark money from this guy Michael Bills in Charlottesville? Like, who the hell is this guy? And him and his wife Sonia Smith giving out $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 checks a pop in House of Delegates races. And in order to get the money, they have to sign a pledge that they're going to basically oppose the pipeline, support his agenda. Of course, pipelines bring jobs, so there's a whole argument there. But they have to sign a pledge to get the $30,000 or $40,000. Paul, isn't that a blatant dark money quid pro quo?
Yeah, it certainly doesn't sound. I'm surprised that it's legal, and I wonder if it's enforceable. But I do believe that my opponent will keep all of his promises, which are 2 of which are to oppose both of the pipelines. He has signed up for every idea like that, and then in return gets the money from those groups. The Moms Demand Action is one example. The unions on the right to work issue is another. So it doesn't surprise me, and I'm sure he's happy to do it. He looks to Lee Carter for his policy advice and has said so multiple times. He literally will say, well, if Lee Carter voted against it, and in some cases Lee Carter was the only person that voted against it, he says, well, I better check with Lee. He does his homework. That's a quote.
Look, your opponent is very liberal. There's no question about it. But he's going to outspend you, outraise money. Of course, all this money is going to come in at the end from foreign sources. Foreign meaning not Virginia. So they're going to get a ton of money from Bloomberg on down, from Everytown USA. Plus, we expect more money to be coming in from George Soros. More money to be coming in from the dark money Michael Bills faction. So you're going to get outspent in this race, no question. In a swing district, outspent and having aggravated, obviously, some of the Thomas backers with your primary challenge. How do you cobble together, Paul, a coalition to win this race?
Well, it's tenuous. The way you describe it makes me it's not a great description, but it's probably close to being accurate.
Thank you.
I've in half of this district, I have represented this for 12 years, and I spend a crazy amount of time on the ground. I've always been a door knocker, and we also have a really great team of door knockers that we hired. We started bringing them in, volunteers, and then hired people back a year ago. The first people started knocking a year ago in the primary, and these are not kids. And what you think of when you see people typically at the doors in elections, they can speak to you about the issues. They can politely challenge you on assertions, and they believe in the message that we are spreading. So I think that really makes a difference. We saw it work. My primary was no small task to upset Bob Thomas. He had an incredible base, a ton of money, and the support from every elected Republican almost. I think every last one of them in the area, including we had George Allen endorsing him, all kinds of people out of the district too. So it's just hard work, a smart, efficient campaign, and this one that makes sense. It sounds like a cliche, but I really believe that we can argue our points, and they make sense. They're very easy to stand by. And again, the fact that he is so far left. Had he been moderate, or had he moved to the middle, a little, he may still try. He might have given us an even harder time, but he hasn't. He has continued. He's very proud of his positions. He keeps espousing them as far left as he can go. So, is our district ready for that? Boy, I don't think so. I've lived here for 32 years, and I came from the county next door. I don't think we're ready for that, but we might be. We'll find out.
We're with Republican candidate for the House of Delegates, Paul Milde. Paul is running for the seat that he defeated Bob Thomas, the incumbent Republican, in a primary in June. The election is what, Paul? It's November 6th, if I'm right. So November 6th, I want to get the date right. Yeah, November 6th is a general election. Yeah, so it's not that far away. And Milde's seat likely to be one of two or three seats that are hanging in the balance that will determine whether the Republicans control the House of Delegates and Kirk Cox remains a speaker, or it is taken over by Caucus of the Corn and the Crazies, which they're at the gate right now, led by Paul's neighbor, Commie Lee Carter. Now, your opponent is opposed to right to work. That's one of the first things they're going to get rid of. Outline that for us, Paul.
Well, this is good. We did our opposition research, and we had never seen him actually say he was opposing right to work. But we knew that he was endorsed by several unions, and the unions said we are endorsing him because he'll take away he'll vote against right to work laws. And then at a debate we did about a week and a half ago, he came just right out and said he was in favor of repealing right to work when the question was asked. But he couldn't even describe right to work. He did not know. And my opponent's 29, and he's a nice guy. I'm not saying anything bad about him or his age, but he's young, and he doesn't. He thought that right to work prohibited unions from being able to operate in Virginia, and that's pretty much how he described it. So he's taken that position without fully understanding it. And of course, we know that you can still unionize right now in Virginia. You just can't be compelled to join a union or pay union dues. So it's not a very complicated policy. I mean, that's cut and dry, and I think he probably understands it now and probably still supports it.
All right, so let's get to some of the other issues, if we can, and let's get to gun legislation. A lot of the crazies in Caucus of the Corn, led by Mark Levine in Northern Virginia, have called for gun confiscation. I was not happy, as everyone knows, that the Republicans kicked the can down the road with Northam's Governor Tunnel's, I call him his special session. But let's get to gun legislation right now. There is one legislator in Virginia Beach, conservative Jason Mieres, who has proposed an extension of red flag laws with due process. He's also proposed universal background checks, ending the gun show loophole. Guns are one of the big issues that the Democrats are talking about. Are either of those two positions something that Paul Milde could back if you're in the House of Delegates, Paul?
Well, a red flag law with due process almost sounds like an oxymoron. So I'd like to know what that means exactly. The way I understand red flag laws and the ones that have been used in 20-plus states 36,000 times and studied carefully by people who don't have an agenda, is that you can accuse someone, or for instance, I'm out mowing my lawn at 3 a.m. in the morning, and my neighbor thinks I'm crazy, goes to the magistrate, says I'm nuts, have guns, and have threatened them, and the magistrate would make the decision, or a judge, I guess, without me having the chance to defend myself. That's not due process. So, and they take your guns away. Then later you can get them back through a series of hearings. I guess if you prove that you were allowed to, should have had them, or safe to keep them. So that what I just described is not okay with me. And more importantly, they've been studied and they don't work. The study I just read a couple of weeks ago that was actually published in the Freelance Star here showed that out of those 36, after studying those 36,000 cases where they had been used, they did not reduce the suicides that were committed. They didn't reduce murders or the amount of people killed in mass murder. So they weren't effective. Now, if you can find one that works and doesn't violate due process, which is what you kind of said, sure, why wouldn't I talk about that? I'm very interested in the Constitution. I think the Second Amendment is extremely important, and I don't want to tinker with it with things that are emotional, that are coming from emotion and aren't going to work. Just like your assault weapons bans, we know they don't work. We know that rifle murders are just a very small part of deaths by gun, and certainly fewer people are killed by rifles, even whether or not they're assault style or not, that are by hammers, knives, and fists, according to the FBI. And universal background checks. I buy guns. Whenever I buy a gun, including at a gun show, I get checked out. I don't know. So I don't know how restrictive they are, what they're proposing for universal background checks. But I know there's enough liberal states out there. They've tried a lot of different things, and we can look and see what has worked. If things have worked and they don't violate this, due process, and they don't bump up against the Second Amendment, then of course I'm happy to talk about those things. But I don't think an emotional response, knee-jerk reactions are the way to go. It's something so important that our founding fathers really it meant a lot to them, and it made sense to make sure that we could protect ourselves, not just from each other, but from our government. And that's why it's there.
So, Paul Milde, if I understand your answer, and I understand it took you a long way to get there, it sounds like you're skeptical of any additional gun laws, whether it be red flag or closing the loophole. It sounds like you're skeptical that you feel like it'll bring incrementalism, and your initial reaction would be no.
Absolutely skeptical, and we should be when it comes to the Second Amendment.
Kathy Tran, third term, what I'm going to call the infanticide bill. Nobody's talking about that right now. It just kind of went by the wayside. I don't really know what the Republicans' message is on it, but no one is talking about it. Have you asked your opponent, Joshua Cole, how he stands on it?
I have not had a chance to ask him directly, but he is one of his two favorite issues are health care and a woman's right to an abortion, and he promises to support greater access, and of course he takes money from Planned Parenthood, and we do. We also know that my opponent, he's all of his money comes from outside sources. He's not a campaigner or really a fundraiser. So I would assume I have to believe he's going to support the people who are trying to put him into office if he gets there. And we know that at least half of the Democrats in the House of Delegates stood behind Kathy Tran on that bill. So I have no reason to believe, and he has certainly not dispelled the notion that he would support something like, during birth, right before birth, and even after birth abortions like they've done in other states. I think that fits perfectly with the rest of his presentation.
If you're elected to the House, are you going to vote in 2024 casinos in Virginia? Yes or no?
I can't say yes or no to that. I've only gotten that question once before. I'm not morally opposed to the idea of casinos. I mean, that may be. I hope that doesn't shock anyone. But I certainly think they have their place where they should be. I was always happy as a Virginian. I was born in Virginia. I've always lived in Virginia. That we hadn't caved. That was something I was kind of proud of. I didn't mind that we didn't allow casinos. But John, I just don't know enough about it.
Well, the money is going to Maryland and West Virginia and Delaware, right? I mean, I don't care how you vote on it. I'm just telling you, the money is going to casinos. It's just not going to Virginia. All right, look, final question, Paul. I've only got a minute and I got to roll. Mm-hmm. You have criminal activity as an adult in your past. Mm-hmm. How do you tell voters, look, I was an adult and I tried to rob a store and break in their roof? I mean, how do you tell voters to vote for you under those circumstances? It's not like you did this at 18. You did this as an adult.
Well, I don't. First of all, that's not true. So that the allegation that was made by my ex, the mother of my children during a custody battle, was that I was involved in a burglary attempt, and that was never. Of course, it wasn't true. She recanted her testimony, and the charges were dropped. So that's what happened 26 years ago. That's the truth. So it doesn't come up often, but certainly when it does, we got some calls from the Washington Post, interestingly enough, in the primary, and that story was told to them, and as well, the ex called the Washington Post and talked to the reporter. A couple of other people involved in the case 26 years ago talked to the reporter. They had lots of exculpatory information that put that to bed, but the Post didn't choose to print that. That doesn't surprise me. So that's the answer to that. I do talk extensively about my, when I was 18, I was still an adult, of course, and my drug issues and going to rehab and turning my life around, and that comes up a lot more often.
Okay, Paul, we're out of time. I want to thank you for being with us. If people want more information, Paul, on your campaign, where do they go?
Oh, paulmilde.com, and that's spelled, my last name is Milde, like Mike, India, Lima, Delta, Echo.
All right, Paul, thanks for being with us.